Okay, it looks like we have a good number, so we can get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Andebele. I'm part of the Office of Research Excellence within the Milken Institute School of Public Health. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you all to this webinar on developing great NIH aims and hypotheses. So this to us is a very, very important event, as it is actually part of our strategy aimed at strengthening research within our school, but also within the university as a whole. So this webinar is co-organized by the Office of the Vice Provost for Research, which is represented here by Dr. Esther Ekins, in collaboration with the Office of Research Excellence, also in collaboration with the Research Workforce Development at GW School of Medicine and Health Sciences, represented here by Dr. Sanjay, and also our very, very important partner, Hanover Research. So let me say thanks to all our partners who have been working together in organizing this event. So today, we've got our main presenter, who is Dr. Sarah Ott, who is going to shortly give us a presentation. But this is also going to be followed up by our own panelists within GW. That's Dr. Manya Magnus from within our own school, and also Dr. Sanjay from the School of Medicine. So without taking much time, let me now hand over to Sarah so that you can now move into the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So welcome to today's webinar. I'm Sarah Ott. I'm a senior grants consultant at Hanover Research. And whether you're a seasoned researcher or just getting started, today's session is going to help you rethink how to translate your academic expertise and your project into a compelling, fundable, specific aims page for NIH. So I've been writing grants since graduate school. I've supported faculty across disciplines in securing over $100 million in funding. I work with Hanover's NIH team, and I'm excited to share practical insights today that can apply to your next grant proposal. I am going to turn my video off when I give the presentation and turn it back on during Q&A, so feel free to do so yourself. This is going to be about a 45-minute presentation. We're going to have a formal Q&A session following, and that will be for about 20 minutes. You're welcome to type questions into the chat at any time, but please know that we may not get to those until the formal Q&A session. And if you're an attendee today, you will receive a copy of the slides. So I am going to turn my camera off at this point. On today's agenda, we're going to walk through the core elements that really make or break a competitive NIH style proposal. So we'll start by talking about how to develop a strong central hypothesis and how that sets the stage for the entire proposal. From there, we'll move into strategies for crafting a compelling specific aims page. And this is really the single most important page of your application. So we're going to spend time on what works, what doesn't work, and how to make yours stand out. And then we'll look at common weaknesses reviewers often call out. And I'll connect those to the official new review criteria so you can see exactly how strengths and weaknesses translate into your scores. After that, we're going to open the floor up for that formal Q&A session so you can ask about your own proposals, challenges, or situations. And then finally, we'll wrap with the panel discussion where you'll hear from different perspectives and practical advice on what reviewers are looking for and how to approach your specific aims with confidence. So when we talk about developing a strong hypothesis, there are a few qualities to keep in mind. So aside from your the science basis of developing a hypothesis, today we're going to focus on what NIH is looking for in your stated hypothesis within your proposal. So if you're looking at developing your central hypothesis, it needs to be clear and testable. So reviewers don't want to hunt for your hypothesis or guess at what you mean. So it should be stated directly in a way that's concrete and testable throughout your proposed research strategy, including your specific aims page. Second, it should be novel but grounded in preliminary data. So novelty is important, but proposals that are too speculative can feel risky. What reassures reviewers is when you show that your hypothesis builds on solid preliminary work, published findings, or strong feasibility evidence. And third, your hypothesis should predict an outcome that is going to advance the field. So reviewers are going to ask, if this hypothesis is correct, what difference will it make in the field? What difference will it make to human health? It's not enough to be interesting. It should move the science forward in a meaningful way. And finally, we need to think about the reviewer lens. So they're essentially asking, is this exciting and testable? You want your hypothesis to be both innovative enough to spark interest and rigorous enough to inspire confidence that can be tested with your approach. Okay, so let's take a moment here and look at an example together. So on the screen, you see the hypothesis. MicroRNAs are important for hair follicle development. I want you to take a minute and think about it. What do you notice about this hypothesis? Would you consider it strong or weak, and why? So I'm going to pause for a minute. I want you to respond in the chat function in Zoom. Let us know what you think about this hypothesis. Is it strong or weak, and why do you think one way or the other? Great. So we have lots of folks saying that it's weak, it's not specific, we don't know what's happening exactly. So reviewers don't want to work too hard to find your hypothesis, but this is really vague. What does important really mean? How are you, or how are they important? Which aspect of hair follicle development are we speaking to? And without this specificity, it's not very testable. It also doesn't tell us what will happen if the hypothesis is correct. So there's no clear prediction of an outcome that would advance the field. So overall, while this is a good start, reviewers would likely see it as too general and more like a statement of fact than a testable scientific hypothesis. If we're going to strengthen this hypothesis, we'd want to specify the mechanism, the role, or the predicted effect of microRNAs on follicle development. So for example, instead of just saying they're important, we could hypothesize that a specific class of microRNAs regulates a defined stage or process, and that makes it clearer, testable, and linked to advancing the field. So moving from your hypothesis to your aims that are hopefully going to test your stated hypothesis, when you're writing your specific aims, it's critical to treat each aim as a distinct, measurable objective. So we want to use active, purposeful verbs like determine, identify, evaluate, develop, compare, or test, because these convey clarity and action. These verbs signal to reviewers that you have a structured plan and you know exactly what you're measuring. Avoid vague or passive verbs like explore, understand, examine. These are often seen as too open-ended, especially at NIH, which wants well-defined, testable hypotheses. So you want to be careful with how your aims relate to each other. They should be logically related, part of a cohesive project, but they should not be interdependent. So that means if aim 1 doesn't work, you still need to be able to pursue aim 2. Reviewers don't like to see your entire proposal hinge on one experiment going perfectly. And that's why we want to avoid language in your proposal like if aim 1 succeeds. It sounds like a conditional plan, and that's a red flag. Instead, we want to reframe it. So, for instance, aim 2 will test an alternative mechanism or method. And this is where your potential pitfalls or potential problems and alternative solutions section in your research strategy comes into play. That's where we can show that the work is going to progress despite what happens with aim 1. So this type of structure is going to help show feasibility, depth, and adaptability, all things reviewers look for in strong proposals. And yes, we are focused on NIH today, but everything we will cover today can be also can be relevant to other funders. It's important, whatever funder you are targeting, that you're familiar with the language that they use and what they like to see as aims or objectives. So for instance, with the folks who are asking the questions here in the chat, if you were applying, let's say, to National Science Foundation, we wouldn't even use the term specific aim. We would be talking about objectives instead. So there are those slight differences, but for the most part, this is going to be a good guide if you're looking at NIH or other funding agencies that use similar styles. So I'm going to get to Sylvia's question, I think, in this particular slide. So here we have some problems with this page. So we have our hypothesis is A causes B, and we have aim 1 is determine that A causes B, and aim 2, we're going to determine how A causes B. So I want to get your thoughts in the chat of what is the issue with proposing a project in this way to NIH? Okay, so we have folks saying aim 2 is dependent on aim 1. So if aim 1 shows that A does not cause B, your study is done. Someone else says this is a fishing expedition, and I'm thinking they're probably talking about aim 2. So for this common project setup, we say this is a common issue. So this specific aim asking this question, does A cause B? This approach has a significant drawback because your project could come to an abrupt end if A doesn't turn out to cause B. And this makes your research highly dependent on a single outcome. It's better to design an aim where the result doesn't hinge on just one outcome. So instead, we want to consider framing your aim to explore multiple potential outcomes. So the question could be, does A cause B or non-B? And then we would ensure that non-B outcomes are meaningful and make sense based on your central hypothesis and your preliminary data. This approach is going to provide a broader scope for investigation and keep your project viable regardless of those specific results. Another issue here is a descriptive aim. So descriptive aims are typically of limited significance. For instance, if we say something like, we will measure levels of X in 1,000 samples of Y to characterize a pattern of expression. So while this is very doable, it's rarely a highly significant finding in itself. Descriptive aims often lack the depth and impact needed for a strong proposal and should generally be avoided in an NIH proposal unless absolutely necessary. Descriptive findings should typically be a part of your preliminary data for NIH, not the main focus of your proposal. And they provide essential background information, but they're not usually a study that's going to constitute a significant research aim on their own. So getting to sort of more qualitative projects or mixed methods, we do know that NIH does typically fund hypothesis-based research more than not. So if you're working on a qualitative study or a mixed method study, we still want to use active verbs. So we still don't want to see those passive verbs. We for the most part, do not want to see explore unless it's an exploratory funding mechanism specifically, because reviewers do tend to see that as a fishing expedition or as a tacked on aim that isn't related to the central hypothesis. So there are ways to work with qualitative studies. We typically look at, if you're not working on a hypothesis-based research, we typically want to include expected outcomes within the aim statements on your specific aims page. So if you're not going to have a stated hypothesis, do include clear expected outcomes. And I would still change your voice over to active verbs in the specific aim statements. And we work with PIs all the time who are working on qualitative and mixed methods research and are able to do that. So I encourage you to do so. And maybe that's something we can talk about in the Q&A if you have a specific aim you would like to talk through. So the specific aims page is really the single most important page of your NIH proposal. It serves as a scientific overview and a persuasive pitch. Reviewers are often going to read the aims page first, and sometimes, unfortunately, it's the only page they read closely before scoring. So that means your job is to make it clear, compelling, and memorable. We want to think of this page as an executive summary of your project, a big picture summary. So it needs to tell reviewers what the problem is, why it matters, what's missing in the field, how your project is going to fill the gap, and why it's going to make a meaningful impact. This page isn't just about what you plan to do, it's about convincing reviewers that your project is worth funding. So that's why we say it's about persuasion, not just summary. As we move forward, keep in mind that the specific aims page is really your opportunity to sell your science and make reviewers excited to advocate for your proposal, which is going to become more and more important than ever. So much of what goes into creating a competitive specific aims page includes crucial elements of persuasive writing. You want to be strategic in your argument to the funder that you are worth funding. So we can employ persuasive writing to effectively argue why your project deserves funding. So this strategic argumentation means that you're going to clearly articulate the significance and necessity of your research, and you're going to justify your proposal by providing compelling reasons to support your funding request. So research indicates that explanations increase agreement, so enhancing the persuasiveness of your proposal. So we want to see your specific aims page be a big picture summary of your work at your proposed project, and also to explicitly state all of these points that we're making, what your proposal objective is, what your long-term goal is, the why of your research. These need to be easily pulled out by reviewers so you end up in the top 50% of the pile and are moved into review. So we're not telling reviewers we are doing X. We are selling it to them by saying we are doing X to address this gap, and it's going to have this impact. The techniques you can use, the persuasive techniques, are framing. How you're framing your work is crucially important. with the administration currently. So we're looking at having political appointees as a part of the review process, and we need to be able to frame our projects in a way that makes sense to them. Comparison to the status quo. So being able to say how your project differs from what others are doing and why it is important. So we have a framework here at Hanover that we recommend for your specific aims page. And this framework shows you how to structure your page in a way that flows logically and addresses exactly what reviewers are looking for. So we typically think of it as 4 short paragraphs. With paragraph 1, you're going to focus on the context and need. This is where you set the stage. You describe the human health need. And whether that's prevalence, morbidity, or mortality, even if you're doing basic work, you need to make that connection to human health. You summarize what is already known and then identify the knowledge gap your project will address. So this is where reviewers immediately see the importance and urgency of your work. Paragraph 2 is vision and focus. So we're zooming out to your proposed solution, your long-term goal, which in an NIH proposal, when we speak to a long-term goal, we're typically talking about what we want to achieve outside the project period. So let's say a 10-year vision. And then you're going to narrow down and state your proposal objective. Which should encompass all of your aims. And then we will speak to your central hypothesis. So these are unifying ideas that guide your aims and your project. Paragraph 3 is going to be your research plan. So you're going to lay out your specific aims, your specific aim statement, and each aim should be linked to the central hypothesis. You may also want to include separate hypotheses for your aim statements. And then paragraph 4 is going to be our outcomes and impact paragraph. So we're bringing it home, we're articulating your expected outcomes and highlighting the impact of your work, not just on the field of study, but also on human health, on training, let's say, student researchers, if you're working on a project that involves students, and potentially strengthening your institutional environment. So in one page, we've moved the reviewer from the problem to your vision, to your plan, and then to the potential impact. And this structure makes it easy for reviewers to follow your story and to understand why your project matters. So with this formula in mind, we're going to share some specific aims documents from PIs at your institution. They are here with us today. The first is from Dr. Magnus, and this particular proposal was funded in 2012. So some details and data have changed since that time. We have updated this page modestly for purposes of this seminar, but what I've done is taken the PI specific aims page here and highlighted these components that we are speaking about today. So here we have the hook, or sort of we are trying to grab the reviewer's interest by whether it be statistics or a statement that reviewers might not know that shows how significant the problem or the gap in evidence is. And then we are discussing what we know, what the research has already found, what we're aware of, and that leads into the gap in knowledge, what we still need to do to answer the questions that we have. And here we have the critical need. So the need statement that speaks to reviewers about exactly what needs to be done to move the field forward. So this is setting the stage for that solution paragraph, the vision that we talked about on the last slide. So we do have the PIs here on the call with us. If you have questions for them, feel free to ask in the chat, and we will get to those either as we're reviewing these pages or during our formal Q&A session following the presentation. So this is actually created by me. This would be a very explicit solution paragraph that we would recommend in your specific aims. And you can see that I am making this as simple as possible for reviewers to know what we are doing. I have labeled my long-term goal as a long-term goal, underlined it. I have the objective here and a central hypothesis, and then a little bit about how we're going to do what we're proposing to do. And then we go into the aims statement. So Dr. Magnus has aims here to develop a screening instrument and to characterize structural barriers to biomedical and behavioral HIV prevention services. So you can see here, these are short aim statements, which I typically recommend unless you need to add some discussion to make it clearer for reviewers. But if the shorter you can keep your aim statements, typically the better for the aims page itself. Here we do have an aim to characterize structural barriers. And I know we just talked about, how that can be a potential issue with NIH, but there are cases where it makes sense and it needs to be done. So everything we're talking about today, there is always going to be a case otherwise. So please keep that in mind, especially when what those expectations are in your specific field. So some institutes and centers have different expectations at NIH, just like your field of research has different expectations. So please keep that in mind as we walk through this today. And then the final paragraph, we summarize your project. And depending on the opportunity, the funding mechanism you're targeting, you could speak to innovation here, expected outcomes, and your potential impact, hopefully at all of those levels we mentioned. The significance of the project or the impact of the project, sometimes I find PIs who we work with at Hanover including this statement, but prior to the AIM statements. Of course, you can do it that way. You're the PI, and if that's your preference. But we recommend placing it at the end of the specific aims document, because then it is the last thing the reviewers read, the last statement they see, and it tends to stay with them that way. And I see that some of the discussion in the chat about the aims that we shared, and I think this goes back to sort of the differences in the field. So when I work on aims pages for PIs or research strategies, there are different expectations in different fields and for different institutes or centers you're targeting. So for instance, some institutes and centers, I would advise a PI to separate something like this out into 2 projects, or to do this as a pilot first, or to work on characterization before, let's say, aim 1. But in other fields, that's not the case. It is acceptable. And that's why it's so important to also do your due diligence and, talk with your peers, look at NIH Reporter, look at the funded project summaries, which typically have the specific aims included in them, and see what is common for the institute or center to which you are applying. So ask around if you're not sure, if you're an early stage investigator, especially, and you're not quite sure of what those norms look like for your field. It's really important to get a handle on that before you apply and before you structure your aims in your project. Also, reaching out to program officers. They are still being responsive. We are still receiving feedback from program officers for our PIs. So don't hesitate to share a specific aims page with a program officer to get their take, to see what they think about the aims themselves or if they have recommendations. So somebody asked where they can find NIH-funded project summaries. Thank you, Kelvin. That is NIH Reporter. All funded NIH studies are housed there, and you can search by keyword, you can search by activity code, you can search by institute or center. It's a really great way to see what is funded. So here we have another PI who has graciously shared their specific aims with us. And this is our sort of first paragraph we talked about here. It's to that is fine. We are setting up first the hook, what the issue is. It's a critical event that leads to chronic neuroinflammation, neurologic injury. And then we discuss what is known. I also want to point out here, we have stated that this is relevant to this particular request for awards. And that's always something great to do, whether that's in this section or if it's in the impact section. It's wonderful to point out how your project aligns with the funding agency and their priorities for that particular funding opportunity. And then here is our solution or vision paragraph. We are discussing what we want to do. And please know that this is created by Hanover. This is created by me. I am saying what we want to do, why it needs done, and how I'm going to do it. And notice that these aren't necessarily in the same order on these specific aims pages. What is important is that you have the information covered. So here we have some longer aim statements, but I think that it is necessary in this case because we do have sort of a dense project and we need to provide some explanation to what these monocytes are, and exactly what we are doing. So the final paragraph here, I've created this impact paragraph where I'm speaking to innovation, expected outcomes, and the potential impact on therapeutic targets. You could speak to the field in general, but we always want to bring it back to human health and the practical clinical impact when possible. So if you're working on your own specific aims page, or you're sitting down to work on a specific aims page, it can be really helpful to circle and label the components we highlighted today in the last few slides. So just as I've done in the slides here with your peers, you could go through, highlight, do you have a hook? Have you discussed what is known? Have you stated a gap in knowledge or in a critical need? And have you briefly explained what you want to do, why you are doing it? The why is what is most commonly missing from specific aims documents that I review, and how you want to do it. So beyond the aim statements themselves, do you need to cover some basics of the processes? Then your aim statements, making sure that you have enough detail that reviewers can at least assess the feasibility, but not going too far in the weeds because the aims page is this big picture document. Innovation, especially if you are applying to a mechanism that highlights innovation. So let's say in R21, you want to make sure you are speaking to the innovation in the aims page. your expected outcomes and impact. And here at Hanover, we do recommend ending the specific aims page with those concepts. And after you've looked through and said, do I have these components? Think through, have you clearly defined the problem? So is it explicit? Is your hypothesis clear and testable, like we talked about? Is your central hypothesis being tested by all of the specific aims? And are the aims brief? Can they be understood? And how can you use more explicit language? So, for instance, labeling as the objective, the long-term goal, or even improving formatting and language to help reviewers find your information. Okay, so we have a couple of questions here. And does NIH usually require a theory of change to communicate expected impact visually? So it's not required, but I find it helpful for PIs we work with to create something like a logic model to show how those connections are being made. It doesn't need to go in the proposal, but it's a good way to organize your project for yourself and even sometimes for collaborators, especially if you're somebody working with the community on community engaged type projects, where it's something visually that you can share with potential collaborators to show them what your project looks like. So yes, I think it's a good planning tool, but it's definitely not expected in an NIH application unless you're working on something like an NIH T award or a T training type grant, where we would more typically see logic models and robust evaluation plans, that sort of thing. Yes. So the critical need and why you're doing it. So that's an interesting question of what is the difference in those two. So first, we need to show that something is missing. There is a gap. We don't know why these folks are getting this chronic disease more than other populations. So that's the critical need. But the why you're doing it is, why is it important? So sometimes we can say, no studies have been done on this. That's great to be able to say, but maybe the studies haven't been done because it's not important or it's not necessary. So we need to describe both of those. So why is it important? Because if we can, for instance, find out why this population is getting this chronic disease, we can potentially save lives, save money. So making those arguments and those connections, the longer term impact and the human health impact along with the importance is going to be helpful. So as far as the number of aims goes, so there's no magic number in specific aims, and really you should be pitching the scope of what you want to do. I do understand, when you look at different mechanisms, you might be thinking, oh, this is a smaller pot of money, maybe I should have fewer aims, which sometimes happens. So typically I see, for looking at something like an R03, we would typically see 2 aims, R21, 2 aims, sometimes 3, R01, typically 3 aims, but it's perfectly acceptable to have a 2 aim R01, especially let's say if you're looking at a 3-year R01 as an early stage investigator, it might make more sense to pare that project down. So someone asked, should you have one central hypothesis, which is explored through several aims, or a hypothesis for each aim? So PIs have preferences on this. I know some PIs include a central hypothesis and hypothesis for each aim. Others just prefer to have the hypothesis for each aim and no central hypothesis. That is all fine. What is most important is if you have a central hypothesis, that all of your aims are testing it. And if you have a hypothesis per aim, that it is it is testable and specific. So with that, I'm going to move on. I think I've covered the relevant questions that go along with our slides to keep us on time here with the presentation itself. So common reviewer critiques, a hypothesis that is vague or untestable. So reviewers want those hypotheses that can be clearly tested. They don't want to see those fuzzy statements like "we will explore." Instead, we want to use precise language. Also, aims that are too ambitious or too descriptive. So overly ambitious aims, the scope of the project, this sort of relates to the number of aims. But the number of aims in the scope can still, not be aligned. So you can have a 3-aim project that has a smaller scope than a 2-aim project, depending on how you write it. What we need to make sure is that we're right-sizing your project, obviously for the budget, but also for what is typical. So when you look at NIH Reporter at those funded studies, look at the scope of the project. What are these PIs doing with the money? And make sure that you're not promising to do more with less. So some folks I know, especially when you're starting out, it seems like that might be an advantage, and it's really not, because it typically just raises feasibility concerns with reviewers. So we want the aims to be focused and achievable in the grant period, and we want to be able to show the feasibility that we can do it on time. With the descriptive aims, again, they typically don't show advancement of knowledge, and it's difficult sometimes to provide preliminary data or to show the feasibility of those. So reviewers want to see evidence you can execute the project. So even small pilot data or published work can help build the credibility and support those aims. Poor alignment with the notice of funding opportunity or the institute priorities. So reviewers will often comment when the proposal doesn't match the funding announcement's intent. And you always want to frame your work in terms of fit. So why it matters to the Institute's mission, to their priorities. And just a big picture reminder. So most critiques are about presentation and framing as much as science, and strong writing and alignment can often overcome doubts. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about NIH's new review criteria. So if you haven't submitted since January of 2025, you may not have encountered these new review criteria yet. But essentially, reviewers are now asked to focus on 2 questions. So should the proposed research project be conducted? And can the proposed research project be conducted? So is it important, and is it feasible? These review criteria are currently relevant for the following activity codes. So if you're applying to one of these activity codes, keep these in mind. The simplified framework for NIH peer review criteria. So this is what we are referring to as the new NIH review criteria, the simplified review framework. It retains the 5, what we refer to as regulatory criteria, so significance, investigators, innovation, approach, and environment, but reorganizes them into 3 factors. So 2 will be evaluated for sufficiency. Reviewers will consider factors 1, 2, and 3 in the determination of scientific merit and in providing an overall impact score. And in addition, factors 1 and 2 each receive a separate criterion score. So the reframing of the criteria serves to focus reviewers on the 2 central questions, and also how important is the work, how rigorous and feasible are the methods, and whether the investigators and the institution have the expertise or resources necessary to carry out the project. So factor one is now importance of the research, and that captures both significance and innovation. It's scored 1 through 9. Factor two is rigor and feasibility, which contains your approach and is scored 1 through 9. And then factor three, expertise and resources, that's investigator and environment. And it's now evaluated as either sufficient for the proposed research or not. So if a reviewer says that your expertise or your environment is not sufficient, they must provide an explanation of why they think that's the case, but there is no score any longer. So for factor one, importance of the research, reviewers are evaluating the importance of the study in the context of the current scientific challenges and opportunities. And they're looking at advancing knowledge within the field and also sort of more broadly, assessing whether the application addresses an important gap in knowledge in the field, if it's going to solve a critical problem, so this is our critical need, or create a valuable conceptual or technical advance. So they are evaluating the rationale for undertaking the study, the rigor of the scientific background for the work, and whether the scientific background justifies the proposed study. So the most common issues we see with significance or common critiques is sort of a lengthy literature review that isn't necessary to meet the review criteria. So when you're looking at drafting your significance section, try to align it with the review criteria. So make sure that you're stating the importance, that you are talking about the gap in knowledge and how you're addressing it, that you're pointing out the critical problem, and then that you are showing the rigor of the scientific background. So this is your prior literature and your preliminary data. And you're showing in this section how it justifies your proposed work. So you are looking at the literature of the lens of this is what has worked, this is what hasn't, and this is how our project is solving those issues. With innovation, you're evaluating the extent, reviewers are evaluating the extent to which the innovation influences the importance of undertaking the work. So whether that is technical or conceptual innovation, even if a project is not applying, let's say, novel concepts or approaches, the way the review criteria is written now, reviewers can consider that the project can still be of critical importance for the field, even if it does not have or use novel concepts or approaches. And that's because significance and innovation are now scored together. You receive one score for those. So for the approach, reviewers are looking at the scientific quality of the proposed work and evaluating the likelihood that compelling reproducible findings will result. So that's the rigor, and assessing whether the proposed studies can be done well and within the timeframes proposed, so feasibility. This is why we encourage you to include a timeline in your research strategy. Even if you're working, let's say, in a clinical study that requires a timeline in another part of the application, always include a timeline in your research strategy, even if it's a very short Gantt chart, so reviewers can judge the feasibility. For rigor, we're looking at the potential to produce unbiased, reproducible, robust data. So they're looking at the rigor of the experimental design, the sample size, whether it's sufficient and well justified, whether you have a power analysis, your plans for data analysis and interpretation, how you're going to report results, and whether you have adequate plans to address biological variables such as sex or age in the design, analysis, and reporting. If you're looking at human subjects or vertebrate animals, they're also looking at the rigor of your intervention or study, and whether those outcome variables are justified. So whether the results will be generalizable, or let's say you're looking at special groups or rare diseases, if they're relevant to that particular subgroup. For clinical trials, we're also looking at the adequacy of inclusion plans, and the consideration of appropriateness may include disease, the condition, their behavior incidence, the prevalence, the population burden. So there's a lot that goes into if it's rigorous and reproducible in the clinical trial space. And then feasibility. So whether your approach is sound and achievable. And for clinical trials, the adequacy and feasibility of the plan to recruit and retain participants. And then additionally, looking at enrollment based on age, based on sex, and evaluating whether the study timeline and milestones are feasible. So I'm going to answer just a couple related questions. I have a few minutes, and then I'm going to walk you through some Hanover resources you can leverage. So how, contrast against how they evaluated proposals previously. Okay. So comparatively, when we're looking at review criteria, we still have significance, investigators, innovation, approach, and environment. We still have the factors, the same factors that are funneled into these 3 factors now. But when we're looking at the differences, so the differences, significance and innovation used to be separate scores, and now they are scored together. So you have more leeway with having a less innovative project and still perhaps receiving a low or good score. On the approach side, we have seen reviewers be more critical of the rigor. So having a sample size, having a power analysis, making sure that you have a timeline to show feasibility. And then with factor 3, the big change is that there's no numerical score. It's is there sufficient expertise and resources? Yes or no? And if no, why? But no score associated with that any longer. So Tucker has a question, should we be organizing the proposal differently or sections of the science? So I don't recommend changing significance and innovation. I still recommend having your significance, innovation, and approach sections. I have seen more investigators including a rigor and feasibility section separate in their approach. Though I think most reviewers expect to find that within your approach and your methods. So I think either is fine. As far as your expertise and resources, I always encourage PIs to include even a couple of sentences about the team in the approach section at the beginning, to discuss why you are right for the proposal, why you're the right team to conduct the study. So we have someone who says they were trained to clearly lay out significance, innovation, and approach as labeled sections. Yes, so we're still using those 3 sections. Don't change them, don't add words. If you add anything, let's say like rigor and feasibility, make that a subsection of the approach. So for Hanover resources to leverage, we do have grant alerts, grant calendars. You can sign up for those with a link that's available in the slides. Here's just an example of our non-federal research grants calendar. We lay out what opportunities are coming down the pipeline and organize those by month. And we have several thematic calendars for those. And then we also have our own Hanover funder search. So it's not as exhaustive as something like Pivot, but it is what we use, what we find to be the most likely matches for our PIs as far as prospecting for potential grant funding mechanisms. And you can look at those by topic. And then in addition to the webinars that we provide to clients like we are today, we also offer more public-facing webinars. They're during lunch. They're typically 20 minutes. These are our topics for the rest of the year. And as a Hanover client, you all have access to our Grants Learning Center, where we have online courses on NIH proposal development, National Science Foundation career proposal development, and then what we refer to as our essentials courses, which cover basics like prospecting and program officer outreach. And they are fairly easy to navigate and typically very short modules if you're interested in those. So that concludes my session for today. What we're going to do now is move to the more formal Q&A. So questions, reflections, let's talk. We'd love to hear what you're thinking, questions you have about proposals, about your own specific aims, about funders or your own writing. But thanks for your attention today. We have time now for your questions. Feel free to unmute or drop them in the Q&A. Let us know what you want to hear. I think that we have a couple of questions that we can start with here in the Q&A space. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my video back on, and we can chat about, someone asks, what is the difference between interrelated aims and interdependent aims? Yeah, so I don't know if this is the same person that says this was answered in the presentation, but I'm not sure if somebody answered themselves here, but yes, interdependent aims are if you could not complete subsequent aims based on the results of a previous aim.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah, for this very, very clear presentation. So of course, now we're going to go into some of the questions that were asked even when the participants were registering for this webinar. So thank you also for sharing the various resources that are available to the attendees. And just to note that we had over 200 participants attending and coming from different countries. I could see some familiar names from Mali, Pakistani, Zambia, and Uganda. So there are some partner institutions in those countries. So I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Manya and Sanjay for making your AIMS pages available so that they can be used as part of this training. So now just to go through some of those questions. There was one question that came in during the registration process, but even today it kept on coming in. So I would like Sarah and your colleagues, the two panelists, to also comment on this question. Do you have a recommended number of aims for the different NIH mechanisms?
Well, let me respond to that question. So it depends on multiple things are there. So there's no clear-cut answer to this question. So if you are writing a proposal for RO1 mechanism, it is more established research program versus R21, which is exploratory. And so that most of the R21s I have seen are with the two aims. Most of the RO1s I have seen or I wrote, there are three aims. But once I have written 6 aims for RO1 too. But that depends on the topic or the hypothesis that you are addressing. If that hypothesis is multifaceted, then each of those need to be addressed separately in each aims. So it is justifiable if you have more specific aims. So my point is that it all variable. It all depends on your type of research that you are proposing.
Thank you, Manya.
Yes, I can add to that as well. I completely agree. I think part of as a reviewer, when I review grants on study section, I'm always impressed that it's somehow obvious when people are just feeling they have an arbitrary need to have a number of aims, when the aims are not sort of organic and driven through the need of the science. So I would think let the science drive the aims. So if you're a junior investigator and you feel like you need to have 3 aims in your R21 to answer the questions and make a compelling, rigorous study, you should do that. Whereas if you may only have 2 aims in an R01, and if that's appropriate, then it's appropriate. But I feel there's an arbitrariness that as we write grants, and especially as things are changing and the review strategies are changing, it'll be more and more important for us to be grounded in the science and really ask the questions that must be answered to fill the scientific gaps.
Thank you very much. And Sarah, there is a specific question about the resources that you shared. How can we access those ANOVA resources?
Yes. So you can reach out internally to Paul or Timmy or to Esther to see, if they can connect you with Hanover. You can also reach out to our contact here in Hanover, who is Audrey, but we typically go through your internal processes and they contact us. Within the slide deck, you'll have links to the resources I shared. So you'll be able to click on and sign up, for instance, those email alerts and register for webinars.
Thank you very much. And there is a question here. What is the difference between critical need and why are you doing it? What is the difference between critical need and why are you doing it?
Yeah, and go ahead.
Yeah, so
Sanjay.
one quick note here is that so there could be a critical need, but then why we are doing it because we can do it. So that is the difference. So that I have a right team for this, I have the necessary resources for doing this, and I have the perfect model in the hands in the lab. We have it is supported by preliminary data for the feasibility and all that. I'm the best team to address this need. That's why we are going to do it.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yes. So I think there are several levels you can look at for the why. So we can look at why you're the right team, let's say for the job, just like we would apply to a position, and communicating that. And we can also look at why it's important to be done. So let's say the timeliness of the project or the potential impact, it's critical. So making those arguments, even at different levels of why. So why is it important? Why are you the right one to do it? Do you have preliminary data that's supported that nobody else has? We want to be able to talk about this succinctly in the specific aims page. So then we want to read more about it in the research strategy, and you sort of move on to the full review and through the process.
Thank you.
Manya, do you have anything to add?
No,
Okay.
that was perfect spot.
Thank you. There is a question that just came in, and basically this is about some of you have been serving as reviewers. I know Manya have also been serving as a reviewer, and Sanjay have also been serving as a reviewer. So the question goes, as a reviewer, how do you assess the feasibility and scientific merit of the specific aims in a proposal, keeping in mind that the feasibility might change with the context of the study place?
I'd love to take that on. That's a terrific question. May I go ahead with
Yes,
that?
please.
Great. Yes, that's a wonderful question. I think that that's part of the job of the grant writer, and that's also part of the job of genuinely sort of submitting a realistic and feasible study that you are describing how it's feasible with your leadership as the grant writer. There is no one place that's feasible automatically. The study context will change, the people will change, the leadership will change. And so you need to make the case that you can do the study not just that anyone can do it. And you also can't expect that your study section reviewer will automatically believe you can do it. A really good example is people sometimes think that, oh, everybody can just go into the field and do field-based research in a community. But if you don't have experience with that, if you don't have letters of support, if you haven't provided a narrative arc which shows your reader that you really can do it, you've done it, you can do it, you want to do it, you have supporting people to help you do it, you aren't going to be able to make a compelling case for that feasibility. So part of the job of the grant writer is to say, not only is it feasible sort of in a general case, but it's feasible with me and my team and what I want to do and what I've done before. And I think that's also, as a reviewer, I see people really fall short because they expect that the reviewers will just kind of understand that something's obviously feasible, but it may or may not be. And it really depends on the PI and the study team who are doing it. So I think part of the creativity of writing grants is really to make sure that everyone is aware of the details and sort of the nuts and bolts of how you're going to get something done. And not just assuming that by saying, oh, I'll be in a van in a community doing survey research, for example, that everyone will really believe it's feasible or rigorous. You have to explain that and demonstrate it very, very clearly. And that I'm interested in others' comments.
Thank you. Sanjay?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing is that feasibility often is driven by the preliminary data and the strength of preliminary data. If you have a very strong, compelling preliminary data, you're essentially saying that everything is feasible in my hands.
Thank you very much. Sarah?
Yeah, so I think that we've covered this. I think that I would just add, when we're looking at feasibility, I think that the timeline is really important. And I see that left out. I think you get to the end of the proposal and you're trying to make your 12 pages or your 6 pages, and it's easy to cut out your timeline. But I think that's really important to show. I know I find it helpful to show the timing and how you think this is going to play out. Because sometimes as reviewers, we can make our own assumptions of what's going to get done when, and especially if we might be more of a generalist than someone in your specific area of work, we might think that it takes longer than it does, or we might not have that insider knowledge. So that's something that I would highlight.
Thank you very much. And there is a related question here. Do you have advice on translating your capabilities into a new research area in a grant proposal? What advice would you provide in terms of translating one's capabilities into a new research area in a grant proposal? Yes, Sanjay?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would just simply say that stick to your guns, where the focus of your grant is. So there could be, say, for example, in my case, I work with the neuro HIV, so neurologic complications with HIV infection. Many of those aspects are also applicable to the Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. If I kind of start saying that, then it is diffused. So the reviewer will be confused whether I'm studying HIV infection or something aging related disease. So that will be like shooting in the foot. So being focused on one area, but showing kind of in a clever way that it could be applicable to others, but the focus of this grant is HIV, something like that.
Thank you. Manya?
I think there's another strategy for that is also really going to building your team. That it's not just you, it's the team you as a leader, as a scientist develop and bring in. So you don't have to be the expert to know every single thing. No one is, none of us are. The most fun part of research is actually assembling the team, bringing the team together. I don't know anything about immunology, but I work with this amazing immunologist. She helps me round out that component. So in your writing, conveying how you work together, how you will integrate your knowledge, how you will integrate your skill sets. So it's not just two siloed groups working independently in the aims, that you're coming together and bringing your skill sets and resources together is a really big strategy, especially if you're pivoting and going to a different type of a field. So I feel that part of us, I don't know, we're so fiercely independent as scientists. Often we think, oh, it's just me. But it's really, it's we. It's not just me. It's all of us. It's the team you assemble and bringing everyone together. And I think that's a critical piece of the science. But if you're trying to pivot to some new field and bring what you've done into another chapter, another adventure, another area, you probably can't do it alone. You're going to rely on your colleagues and your collaborators to make that case. And then you all boats will rise together. That sort of would be my strategy, especially the bigger the departure from what your earlier skill set is, the more and more that's going to be important, because you're not going to convince a reviewer that I'm going from epidemiology to immunology. I don't have that skill set. I need to expand on how that will actually happen.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I will just add also that if you are someone who is looking to go into another area of work, it's always worth it to look at the NIH career funding mechanisms, the K awards. They are not just for early stage investigators. There are special K awards to switch research areas. So if you think it's going to be difficult, maybe to make that argument, or if the collaboration might just not be enough, you can look at submitting a K where you receive some training or some mentorship in that new area, along with conducting a smaller research study.
Yeah, thank you very much. And there is someone who actually noted that, yes, it's good that we can talk about having some very, very nice aims pages, but can you try and relate this to the current funding trends? Sarah?
Yes, so I can speak to that. So what we're looking at are major changes to NIH, and I don't know, Sanjay and Manya, forgive me, I did not ask if you had served on a review committee since the administrative changes. Yes, I'm seeing a nod. Okay, so we're seeing some major changes. From our side at Hanover, we are seeing more changes at some institutes and centers than others. And so when we're looking at reviews specifically and writing your specific aims and writing your proposal, what we've seen more emphasis on in some review groups is that translatability. So looking at translation into the clinical environment, into practice, more emphasis on that. We've also seen more emphasis on rigor in some study sections, so more comments on sample sizes, power analysis. We have seen also, maybe just due to timing and because everything has gotten backed up, that some things are being missed. And so we might have perhaps folks, trying to finish out a review on a shortened timeline, or to take on more reviews. And so looking at, emphasizing your points and your proposal, making it easier to read, using tables and visuals, and being very clear about that potential impact. When I was talking about the executive order related to political appointees in the review process, that's something we haven't experienced yet. It's, and how that's going to play out when it comes to the final decision making of who is going to be funded and who is not. But really, we still encourage you to submit your applications to see how the review plays out. If you're working in one of those fields or areas that is a sensitive area right now with the administration, work with your peers, work with folks like Manya and Sanjay and similar people in your departments, and talk with them about how you can frame your work. How can you continue to do your work, continue to be funded by NIH, but frame your work a little bit differently in your proposal so it still meets the administrative, the administration's needs and their priorities.
Thank you. Sanjay?
Yeah, I can quickly add one more thing, and I completely agree with Sarah on these points. So we are a community that we changed over the time, always. So the change is because of the advances in science, as well as the environmental, the indirect ways like political changes, as we are experiencing recently. So one of that, and I've noticed this change in the study section, is that the emphasis on human organoids versus the animal studies, heavy dependence on animal studies, is not reviewed favorably these days. And so there are limitations for the organoids. But what NIH is expecting is that we try to overcome those limitations by some innovative ways and try to make those models more applicable for the research in hand. So the reason they are kind of going away from the animal studies is the relevance to the human disease. And many of those findings were not really relevant to the humans, and that was the reason behind it. But there are some of the studies that cannot be done in humans, or the intervention studies or behavioral studies, that you have to have animal models. So don't be afraid of having animal model in your proposal, but not heavily dependent on it. Not all three aims in animal studies or something. One aim can be addressed in animals or done in animals, something like that.
Thank you very much. Manya?
Going back to just thinking about the new study sections and the reviewing process, I think another thing to add on to what Sarah and Sanjay have mentioned is how important it is, probably more important than ever, to really use lay language. We're scientists, we really dig down into our own area of expertise. But I think with the new composition of study sections, what's happening is people are being called to review grants that may be out of their lanes. That has happened to me already a couple of times, where I had to review a grant that was not something I knew about. And so I really would benefit from having the writer speak to me as a person who was not an expert in their field. And that's not just in sort of disease areas, HIV, cancer, pulmonary disease, but also in terms of basic science versus translational science versus clinical science. Each of us has one or two things we really know. And in probably the olden days, we would be given grants to review that would be very linked to our area of expertise. But I don't think that's the case anymore. As reviewers, we're going to be called to read a lot of different types of science. And so as a writer of a grant, really focusing on communication of your ideas, your aims, your science, all the things Sarah mentioned earlier is going to be more important than ever. Simplicity is going to, take precedence over sounding super sophisticated, and jargon may not be understood. So I would say that's something that's changed in the study review process. Even the study section I was in this a couple months ago. I was really impressed how much my brain was taxed to go outside my areas of comfort. I had to really think broader and see wow, what are they talking about? This was a whole different field than I knew about. So I'd encourage you as a writer, and I'm trying to encourage myself as a writer, to not flex to your immediate peers. Try to be clear to everyone as scientists, knowing you're going to get super smart people reading your grants, but they may not be in your area at all. And I think that's a real big change that I've noticed. And I think it's only going to get more and more because everything has changed in how the review process is running. But that's not bad. Like Sanjay said, we've always been a community of dynamic scientists. We change, we learn, we have all sorts of different things we've done over the years. It's not the same now as it was even 10 years ago. So instead of fearing change, embrace it. We're scientists. That's our job, to be dynamic and to learn and grow. And it'll be okay. We just have to respond to the times.
Thank you so much. Recently, I was talking to some colleagues who just got their scores after submitting to the NIH. And one of them was actually informing me that they got 25, which is a very, very good score, but their application was not funded due to the recent, cuts. So we are realizing that we are in this different moment where things have to be done differently. It also means we have to be super smart. There is a question from one of us which says, do you have any specific recommendations for the specific aims page in K awards compared to R awards?
Yes, I can start with that one if that's okay with everyone. So I work on quite a few K award proposals, and depending on what K mechanism you're looking at, so the K99 would be a little bit different than, let's say, a K01. But when you're looking at your K awards, you want to make sure that you've equally balanced and presented not only your research aims, but also your career objectives. And that's what I really see left out, is that the career enhancement piece of it isn't really fleshed out. It's more like, just, I'm going to conduct this study and this is going to give me the expertise, but you really need to spend as much time on your career development plan as the research study itself. So when you're looking at your aims, think through, do I have specific measurable objectives for my career plan in addition to the science and the specific aims for the research study, and making sure that your research study is a good scope, like we've talked about for the other awards. So it's not going to be typically an R01 size study. It's typically going to be a smaller study, so you can work on your training and learning methods and mentorship in addition to the study itself. So think of it as collecting some pilot data, some preliminary data, an early on study in addition to the career enhancement activities, so you can move on to an R01 in that space.
Thank you very much. Amanya?
I'm so excited people are thinking about that. At GW, I think we need more K awards. So apply. I think we need to do that. And I'm so excited. I just actually termed off, I was on the NIH study section where we reviewed Ks and Ts. I was just termed off at 6 years. So 6 years of learning, and I feel sad I'm not on that anymore. But I just want to say, I think that issue that Sarah mentioned earlier on in her presentation about overambitious is something that really happens in the K awards. The goal of the research component of a K award is not to be an R01. It's to get you learning and pilot data to go to the next step, which you have clearly planned out. And you know what those data will give you. You might get an R34 and subsequently an R01. But it's not to be that R01. And I think that's one of the #1 things that reduces people's scores in a negative way, which is they become, overambitious, and they're trying to repurpose earlier grant proposals or possibly bigger grant proposals to squish into a K. The K is really nice because you can link your learning to the grant also. And that's another thing we often found in the study section, which is there was lack of linkage between what I'm going to learn and be trained upon and what I'm going to do. They were sort of separate documents, but they really need to be integrated. And finally, this is another example of overambitiousness doesn't really help. There would be very, very overambitious training programs where you would see people who would want to do 12 presentations and 16 courses and possibly get a master's and also have 75% time covered to do their research, but they also have 100% clinical time on their K23. You can't do all that. We expect that people are still human. You're human. Make it leaner, smaller, really thoughtful about what you need to support your career, and that's going to be much more likely to be fundable. But I think we really get training, and that's a wonderful mechanism to help people get trained. And I did want to just mention one thing about something. I think someone asked about a really good score that still didn't get funded in this current environment. I just want to highlight, I've been scored really well and still not gotten funded. That's not only now, and I think there's a tendency to feel that, oh, we're never going to get funded in this environment, but there are plenty of times when you get good scores, but it wasn't part of the priority of the institute, or there wasn't money available, and you just have to keep trying. If you got a good score, it's a win, and enjoy that win, and don't discourage yourself thinking, oh, I'll never get funded. If you got a 25, good for you. Submit it again. You'll get a 19 and you'll get funded next time. But that's not necessarily new. It might be worse right now, but it's not only now. I just want to make sure people heard that. Sorry to go on, but I just wanted to make sure that didn't get lost.
Thank you. That's a great encouragement coming from you, Manya. So I'm going to pose one more question, but this question is going to be directed to Sarah. But of course, there are participants that have been asking about the possibility of submitting their one-pagers for review. And let me just mention that for investigators from within GW, we've got the Mentor Match Review Award that allows us to build a relationship with an expert who can review a proposal for you before you submit. So please reach out to our office if you're interested in that. Thank you all for all those great questions. Now I'm going to pose this question specifically to Sarah, but Sanjay and Manya can also come in. So this participant says there are lists of words that are circulating out there that we need to avoid in our proposals. So the question is, are proposals really being scanned for these words? Sarah.
Yes. So proposals are being scanned for certain terminology that has even changed to a more formalized process with the recent executive orders as far as what language is acceptable to include in your proposal versus what is not. With the language, that's really a choice for the PI. I think that I would never ask someone to self-censor proactively, and I respect people who choose not to do so in situations. What we have found is that, when we're looking at our documents being scanned, it is most likely AI. And so there are creative ways to use terminology that may not be flagged in similar ways. So that is something that PIs are choosing to do, that some PIs ask us at Hanover to do that when we're reviewing and revising their proposals. So there are definitely specific terms that are flagged. Now, we've also gotten deeper into this with the work that we do. I mean, I think each of our GCs is looking at 100 or more applications a year for NIH. So when you get into this in depth, you start thinking of, we're saying that we're looking at diverse cell lines. Is diverse going to be flagged in this way? To our knowledge, it is, but there's a second review by a person who says, should this have been flagged? So that's something to keep in mind too. There's also not a lot of detail about what happens when words are flagged, if proposals get sent back not reviewed. There are specific now, there is specific guidance now in executive orders that says, that has certain language that will result in that. But for the most part, it's vague and unclear about what happens. We also have new AI. I don't know if folks saw that, but we have a new NIH AI policy where we have vague language if significant chunks of your proposal are written or generated by AI, that it will not be reviewed. And that has come along with a yearly limit of proposals from one PI to NIH. So we have a lot of changes. We haven't really had time to see everything play out. So as far as terminology goes, think about the framing of your work. If you're working in areas that are, you're studying minority populations, you're studying certain areas that you think your whole proposal is going to be flagged, which we work with PIs like that. We need to think about sort of reframing your work if you still want to target NIH for the most part. And so we can help to do that in Hanover. There are peers at your institution that you can talk to about how to frame your work, but you really want to focus on everyone. So you want to focus on inclusion, on all And if a subset of that population happens to be this particular population you're most interested in, that's fine. But when we propose it to NIH, there are different ways to frame it.
Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for those questions. Please keep the comments coming through chat. So now we're moving on to the next segment. I'm now going to provide some time to Manya and Sanjay to say a bit more. They could also be addressing some of the questions, particularly those that relate to even their own AIMS pages. So we'll now hand over to Manya.
So should we discuss sort of the AIMS page we received, or do you want to talk more generally about our AIMS pages?
Anything, open.
It's open. Okay, it's open. All right. Well, if it's open, I'm going to follow on to that excellent discussion we just have. And I just want to remind people that we are in a really funny time historically with all of these issues. But if you're thinking about science, I would just encourage you to think about science. And a good aim is a good aim is a good aim. If it's a scientific question that has merit, if there's a gap to fill, it's easy to get bogged down in this moment we're in, but the most important thing is that science contributes to future knowledge, which again will contribute to future knowledge. And it's up to us as scientists to make sure that we don't just abandon what we're doing because of the various types of sort of censorship that actually is happening. So I think that term self-censorship is really important. We really don't want to self-censor. Find a way to communicate the important science you're doing in a way that works for you. And if certain words are important for you, use them. And then you can justify them. And we never would normally get funded anyway. It's never been that NIH or NSF would just hand over money to us. It was never like that. It was always hard. And it's harder now because we don't understand the landscape that we're in. That's what, to me as a researcher, is really frustrating. I'm writing 2 grants right now, so I can share that I'm very frustrated. I work with minority populations at risk for HIV, sexual and gender minorities, and these are very important populations at high risk. And yet, how do we communicate that? And it's very challenging. It's a challenging time, but that doesn't lessen the importance of the science that we're doing. And so I just, every time I get a little tense, I try to remind myself, hold on, take a deep breath, and remember why we're doing this. Why we're doing this is to try to understand public health concerns. In my case, that's my area of research, that we could try to make interventions that will be useful to improve health of populations in the future. And so I just really want to mention, given this moment of open time, that don't self-censor, but be really clear in what you're doing and make your science the best it can be. And then over time, that will emerge as the most important. And that's particularly hard to understand. You're in this moment as a junior investigator. It's challenging and hard, but that doesn't mean you won't make it through. And I can just end before I wrap up that when I was early in my career, there was a time we couldn't actually talk about condom use in grants. You couldn't mention the word condoms. This is not the first time we've had words that were prohibited. And all I did was condom research because we had no pre-exposure prophylaxis for HIV back then. All we had was condoms, behavioral risk reduction. So to be able to not say condoms in a proposal was quite challenging. But we made it through, and here we are. And the only thing we can do as scientists is contribute to the next generation and help each other. So I just would encourage everyone to avail yourself of all these great resources from Hanover, from the Office of Research Excellence. There is a lot of great resources out there to help support you. And I just think sometimes knowing that there's a community out there for you is really helpful. And we're going to make it through. Just don't self-censor, focus on the science.
Thanks very much, Manya, for those wise words. And let me also just mention that we received a one-pager from one of the participants. So I think the most important way of dealing with that is actually for us to send some feedback, which will come from Manya and also from Sanjay. I think that will actually be addressing the needs of that specific individual in a direct way. And of course, I've already mentioned that there are ways in which our office can support you when actually trying to come up with your own research proposal. So now let me hand over to Sanjay.
Yeah, Paul, can I go back to one question? I think that is important. It's a question by Remley Scott, and it's about if the question is for R01 grants, if you are applying as an early career investigator, are you scored with this in mind? So let me answer this question quickly, that you will be reviewed the same way as others, except that your grant will not be trashed. Most likely it will be reviewed, discussed, and you will be scored with the same criteria as like any other grants, but your pay line is a little different as an early career investigator. So that you should keep it in mind. So you have a better chance of getting funded as an early career investigator. The second point in this question is it better to have the primary PI to be more senior? You don't have to be senior investigator. Just as you are, you can propose the research to NIH through R01 mechanism. Whether you need to have senior members to be part of your team. That's a good idea, but make sure that they will not be MPI with you. With that, you will not get an advantage of as an early career investigator. And so quickly, I want to wrap up that one thing I learned in my career, grant writing is enjoyable. Please enjoy it. Don't be stressed out. I know there is a lot of things at stake when you're writing the grant, but just keep that in on the side for a minute. When you're writing a grant, it's a dialogue with yourself. And at least I experienced this, that I improved my understanding of the field by writing grants. So this takes you to the next step always. Whether the grant funded or not is a different thing, but that gives you, that improves yourself, your thinking abilities and everything. When you write an excellent grant, that makes your day. So that day you feel really good. Go for that. So always enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Once again, let me take this opportunity to thank Manya and Sanjay for taking your time to share your experiences and views with our audiences. So now we'll get to our closing remarks. It looks like we are doing very well on our time. Let me now give this opportunity to Sarah to say your parting words.
Yes. So just echoing what Sanjay said and adding to it a bit with reviews and receiving your review summary, and what Manya said about having more generalists on your review panel and your review group. It's so helpful for not only resubmitting your proposal and addressing those concerns, but learning from the reviews. And especially with the generalist reviewers now, you get a different angle than you used to. So it used to be just folks in your immediate area, and you receive sort of similar feedback, I would say. But now with more generalists, there are ideas that come up that you may not have thought about, and it really improves your science. So even if you don't receive funding, if you get a great score or you don't, you're still learning from the process, not only for resubmission, but also for your own science and what you're doing, what your research trajectory is.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Manya, your parting shots?
Well, thanks so much for including me. This has been really fun. And Sarah, I learned so much from you that I'm going to apply to all my grants I'm writing right now. So thank you for that. I just want to remind everyone, the community of scientists is us. We are the scientists. And so we are the ones who are going to, in the end, determine what happens. And if you need support, we're here for you. And don't give up. Just keep enjoying those grants, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much. Sanjay, your parting shots?
Well, thank you so much. That's all I can say. I learned a lot today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Now let me hand over to Esther.
Hi, I'm Esther Erkins. I'm the Research Enhancement Officer here at GW, and I'm in the Office of the Vice Provost for Research. RAU is here to provide support in the following areas. You've all heard a wonderful presentation, and connecting with us is a really good next step as you continue to go forth with developing your proposals. We're here to help with research development consultations, and essentially, we're here to work with you before you plan and as you write your research proposal. So please feel free to reach out to us for a consultation to assist you with early stage project ideation and planning, identifying funding opportunities, and if you're interested in doing kind of team-based interdisciplinary research work, we're here to support you in that in terms of helping you to build and manage those teams. RAU is also here to provide assistance with proposal editing. We work with Hanover and some other consultants around supporting faculty who can work with you during your grant writing process to help you increase the competitiveness of your submission. As I mentioned, we'll connect you with seasoned consultants who will provide you with support with technical and scientific proposal review and editing. We encourage you to reach out to us as early as possible, at least 6 weeks in advance, although in the ideal world, if you can reach out to us a couple of months in advance at a minimum, I think that would be the best because if you're able to have as much time to work on your draft, have as many opportunities to go back and forth with the consultant that you're working with on polishing and drafting your proposal, we really encourage that. So feel free to reach out to us as early as possible to get that support with your proposal development process. We also have trainings such as this and others that we have coming up. So stay tuned. Just reach out to us to the email address on the slide. That is our website where you can go and request support. Also, earlier in one of the chats, Timmy posted my email address to reach out to me directly for support with editing, and then also just any other questions that you may have in terms of working with REU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. So now we are reaching the end of this webinar. And let me take this opportunity to once again thank Sarah, thank Manya, thank Sanjay, and also thank Esther for being part of this very, very important and interesting webinar. It has been a pleasure working with all these team members in preparing for this webinar. Let me also take this opportunity to thank Timmy and the rest of the ORE team. They are there behind the scenes. They've been supporting the preparations, and they are there right now just to make sure everything is moving pretty well. It has been great working as partners to ensure the successful delivery of this webinar. So please look forward to other future events. I saw there were others who were asking about webinars addressing K awards and others. So of course, we're going to work with Esther and others to ensure that we can deliver those. So once again, thanks to all of us at the ORE and all our partners on this event. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.